You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at markguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. Thank you to our sponsor for today's episode, East Brother Beer. Located on Canal Boulevard in Point Richmond, East Brother Beer mixes classic brewing styles with precision and modern sensibility to create the perfect Bay Area craft beer. There has hardly been a time in our country's history when journalism was as important as it is now, and that sentiment extends beyond politics and into science. Each day, new scientific breakthroughs are discovered, slowly but surely moving us into the future. Today, our guest is Lisa Krieger, science writer for the Bay Area News Group. Her works over the years have been covered all sorts of scientific advancements, outdoor activities, medicine, and the environment. This past summer, she has been spending hours in Northern California covering the wildfires ravaging the state. Today, Lisa joins us to share her story, as well as share the stories she's covered about the California wildfires, CRISPR program, stem cell research, the right to die law, and the future of journalism. Well, I appreciate you doing the podcast, and let's just get started. So, Lisa, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for coming on. I'm really excited for this.
Great. My pleasure.
So let's get into a little bit of your background, and how did you get to where you're at now?
So my degree is in biology, and growing up, I loved being outdoors, hanging out with dogs and frogs and backpacking and exploring the outdoors. And my dad was a chemical engineer who shared his love of engineering and also chemistry. And my mom was an outdoor education teacher. And I was an only child. So we did some pretty cool things together, and it was probably the best family one could imagine. So went to Duke University, got a degree in biology, and was pretty much pre-med throughout my entire college career. Second semester senior year, took one journalism class. I'd always enjoyed writing. I was always the kind of student who, brought the Washington Post and other newspapers and magazines in my backpack when I went to lab. So if things finished up early, I could kick back and catch up on some reading. And always enjoyed writing, so I had worked for the college newspaper. Anyway, second semester senior year, took this great journalism course. It was the only one that was available at Duke, and fell in love and basically walked away from a professional career in the sciences to get into journalism. So my first job out of college was for a very rural newspaper in North Carolina on the Outer Banks, if anyone's familiar with that. And great experience in general assignment stories, and then from there missed science a bit and went to Washington, D.C., started writing for the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's called JAMA, in their medical news section, because I had the background in biology to be able to cover medicine and basic research in the sciences and biology, and was there for a while. Basically was frustrated at not being able to reach more of the general public to let them know about what was going on in biology and medicine and the sciences more generally. Was covering HIV/AIDS, which is called gay-related immune dysfunction, when I was in Washington, D.C. Was interviewed by the Examiner at that point, Will Hurst, and they needed someone to come out to San Francisco and write about the science of this emerging epidemic that was so catastrophic for San Francisco. So never been to California, flew out, called in sick, flew out, did the interview, flew back. They offered me a position, and 2 weeks later moved out, having frankly no idea about the Bay Area or California, but realized it for the amazing opportunity that it was. And that got me into daily journalism. As a lot of people may or may not know, it's really hard to break into daily journalism.
Mm-hmm.
You basically need to have a whole lot of clips under your belt and a lot of experience with breaking news. And I was able to shorthand that a little bit because I had the background in biology, which is what they needed. So it made the transition a lot smoother than it would have been otherwise. And finally, just to bring us to where we are now, covering the HIV epidemic for 12 years, it began moving out of the gay community where I had so many friends and really cared deeply into more of the IV drug using community. A lot of people that I was close with died, and it was a harder epidemic to cover, and it just shifted my focus a bit, to be honest with you. And coinciding with that was the emergence of the Human Genome Project and this incredible revolution in genetics that we can talk about later. The Mercury News at that point was huge and rolling, and it had this giant science section every week that needed strong, powerful stories, and they offered me an opportunity down here. So I came south to the South Bay, where I still work.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you always written science pieces?
Except for my general assignment experience in North Carolina, and I tried to do as much science there as I could. Yes, I've pretty much always written about either science or medicine or research. So more generally, my coverage area now includes everything from U.S. Geologic Survey to NASA Ames, and then includes all the great research coming out of Stanford and Berkeley and UCSF, and then the outdoors, the natural history of our area.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Rogers is our environmental writer, so I don't do as much environmental writing, but I backfill for him when he's not available. So yes, my whole career has been essentially science and medicine.
So for you, writing about the outdoors, what's been the most gratifying thing about that?
It's such a good news story when you think about it. And there's a lot of bad news in every day surrounding us. But writing about the outdoors is not, and particularly here in the Bay Area. Anyone who's lived anywhere else knows that having quick access to so much open space is a privilege. That's not the case everywhere else. It was not the case when I lived in Washington. It's not the case when I grew up in the Northeast Corridor. You basically had to get in your car and drive for a while. So just having access to such beauty, the Pacific, the Diablo Range, the Santa Cruz Mountains, the Marin Headlands, the Sierra's not that far away if you time it right. And it's also a really good news story because it's a people story. We've got these pioneers that were here in the Bay Area that saved this space for us. Otherwise, what's currently our ridge tops and our open space and our coastline would just be covered with condominiums, hot dog stands, estates, you name it. Mm-hmm. But there were leaders back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s that saved this space for us. And literally every time I go out, I'm reminded of them. We've got, just as examples, and these will be familiar names to people maybe, Sylvia McLaughlin, who was just a housewife and a faculty wife at UC Berkeley, who became a crusader who saved and created East Shore State Park, which is now this just oasis of shoreline around the bay. This was a time when the bay was just a dumping ground for toxics and people's garbage. Down here on the peninsula, we've got Lenny Roberts and Mary Davy and Nanette Hanko. There are Palo Alto residents that looked up at our foothills and said that these need to be saved. And GGRNRA, the huge space has been preserved in Marin and San Francisco. And we've got Congressman Phil Burton. So pioneers, and because of their commitment, we're just privileged to have this space. Yes, it makes us more crowded and more urban in areas where there's not open space, but there's been study after study showing that it increases the quality of life here in the Bay Area. It makes us more disciplined about our land use practices, and it's also something that we can't take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are members of Greenbelt Alliance are familiar with it. There's a recent study that looked at the number of acres of farmland and natural areas that are still under threat, and specifically in Contra Costa County, in Pittsburgh and Antioch, Oakley, Brentwood, places like that. Down here in the Coyote Valley, San Jose, Morgan Hill, is still zoned for industrial development. So, to stay true to the vision of our pioneers, continuing to protect this open space is really important. And so every time we go out in it, it's a privilege and something that was made possible by those who came before us, but it's also something that we need to protect moving forward.
Yeah, I know one thing that when you live in the Bay Area, it can be very fast-paced lifestyle, and you tend to forget a lot of the different beautiful parts of the Bay Area, and you forget about a lot of the wildlife, hiking trails, and all the beautiful scenery you have here. In your opinion, what's your number one favorite place here in the Bay Area?
Uh-huh. That's hard. Probably my go-to, just because I live down the peninsula, is a trail called Ancient Oaks Trail. It's on Russian Ridge, which is a mid-peninsula open space property. You get up there, it's up on top. It's right on the ridge there, and these oaks are gorgeous, hundreds and hundreds of years old, gnarly, and you look out on one side and the Pacific is below you. You look out on the other side and it's just the crest. Right over the other side is Silicon Valley, and as you say, it's so crowded and can be so crowded and not always great air, terrible traffic. But you're up there in those oaks, and it just reminds you of really what a sanctuary we have.
Hmm.
I've got some other places I really enjoy. Sunol Regional Wilderness is a treasure, particularly the Little Yosemite area. Beautiful ranch lands of what used to be the East Bay. We've got here in the South Bay, Mount Umunham just opened. It's been closed to the public since 1980, and it's on the top of I don't know, I want to say like 4,000 feet, overlooking. It's in the Sierra Azul Open Space Preserve near Los Gatos. Looks out on the entire South Bay. Just opened up to the public. You can drive up there. You can hike up there. Sweeney Ridge in Pacifica. That's where Portola first discovered the San Francisco Bay, and you're basically retracing history and going there. And then my favorite trail in the North Bay or the near North Bay is the Steep Ravine, Mount Tam, Matt Davis trails. They're on the flanks of Mount Tamalpais. Same thing. You're looking down the Pacific. You're looking up on the beautiful range there, Coast Range. Just really, really special.
That's amazing. Sounds like you're a very avid hiker.
Oh yeah, every weekend if I can.
I've hiked those Mount Tam trails a few times too. It's a beautiful hike up there.
Yeah.
Yep,
I heard parking's a lot more difficult up there though.
it is. They're trying to figure out what to do. It's been too many people love it, which is a high class problem, as my grandmother would say. So they are trying to figure out how to manage it. But people all over the country, all over the world, come here to experience what we just take for granted every single day.
Hmm.
And I think it's the onus is on us to get out there and take advantage of it.
Yeah, plus it's something that feels really good when you get out there onto the hiking trails, into the mountains, into the woods. The fresh air, the quality, it's just very peaceful, very relaxing. It really takes away
Yep,
a lot of the day-to-day stress that people experience.
yep, yep, yep. It's all true.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the scientific developments or research that you've been covering lately. So, what should be something that the public should be looking at for scientific and new developments?
Hmm. Boy. Well, a lot of what I spend my day-to-day life covering right now are wildfires, and we can talk about that, of what are the key findings that are coming out of these fires. Spent a lot of time, particularly during the drought, writing about water, which is critically important, really complicated, and the smarter people are about it, the more informed they'll be when it comes to understanding our infrastructure, protecting our infrastructure, understanding the source of water. Climate change, clearly, as we're moving towards, in the Bay Area is in the forefront of this, a greener world. The state's taken new steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is going to affect all of us. The state legislature just approved a bill that basically mandates by 2045 that 100% of the state's electricity has to come from renewable or zero carbon sources.
They did sign that
So
into law?
there are those things. And let me just jump in, and we can circle back to any of these. With respect to science, which is more complicated but really interesting, and I love it because, again, it's good news, right? I mean, in the sense that some of the smartest people on the planet are here in our universities in the Bay Area. So the things I write about a lot that mean a lot to me is molecular biology. So we've got CRISPR-Cas9, which people have heard about. It's the ability to basically alter the genetic sequence in our cells.
That's going to be very
Synthetic
interesting
biology,
to see.
people have heard of, what's that?
That's going to be very interesting to see what happens with CRISPR and going forward. I mean, do you think at some point people would be able to basically complete a checklist of what they would want their future baby to look like?
Yeah, you sound like my editors. Short answer is probably no. Probably no. And the reason why, I mean, first, right now there's a lot of resistance to altering what we call germ cells, which is the sperm, egg, and embryo, because you're essentially altering generations downstream if you're going to try and create a genetic blueprint for your child. But from a scientific perspective, it's actually a really hard thing to do. You know, a lot of these traits that we think of as being advantageous, let's just say intelligence, are complicated traits. You know, there's not one gene for intelligence. There are a lot of traits. Athletic ability, there are a lot of different genes and gene expression patterns that influence that. Now, what will happen, and you can count on it, is we're getting way better at identifying, they call it single gene defect diseases, and that are these really catastrophic diseases that are caused by one mutation in one gene, or, you know, one screw up essentially in the sequence of your nucleotides, the ACTG nucleosides that cause disease. And really low-hanging fruit there in terms of intervention. So we're talking about like sickle cell disease, some forms of muscular dystrophy, other types of neurologic diseases, SCID, the immune, bubble boy disease. So what CRISPR will be able to do, we hope, we think, is go in, splice out that gene and either replace it with splice out the bad mutation and replace it with a healthy sequence, so your cells behave like they're supposed to behave, and save people's lives and save tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of treatment that a lifetime with something like sickle cell entails. So that's where I see that happening. Some of the diseases are going to be easier than others for different reasons, and it could be that downstream, as we understand some of the more complicated diseases, like heart disease, which is caused by there are a multitude of genes that contribute to heart disease. We might get better at identifying that, and cancer. You know, that once we understand the genetics and can start to alter them, there's a lot of promise there.
So how would the DNA strand be altered? I believe I read somewhere where they would cut out the specific pattern, strain, whatever this that specific term is, but you would cut out a section of the pattern and then replace it with basically filler. Is that correct?
It could. So for disease like sickle cell, all you need to do is get rid of the bad sequence, because it's complicated. But there's two alleles. One of them is typically sick, the other's normal. If you can get rid of the sick one, it'll give the normal one, the healthy one, what it's going to be adequate to keep people healthy. You don't need 100% healthy cells. You just need to get rid of the 50% of the sequence that's causing problems. With other diseases, you do need to go in, introduce into the cell a fixed sequence. Basically, pull out the bad sequence, introduce the fixed sequence. And, we can go through the mechanics of that. There are different ways of introducing genetic sequences. And they're still working on, delivery vehicles, essentially. But so depending on the disease, there'll be different strategies. But this is already, if people are interested, I did a big piece on the clinical trials looking forward in the next 5 to 10 years. There are already clinical trials being planned at UCSF, Children's Hospital Oakland, and Stanford that is taking on some of these really hard diseases. Sometimes all you need to do is fix the stem cell that creates these deleterious, unhealthy cells. So different strategies for different diseases, but there are probably anywhere from 10 to 30 clinical trials that are now being designed, and they're working with animals. And then we'll pitch them to the FDA or NIH to start ramping up, where you actually start to have patients involved.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about stem cells. So right now, the research trials going on with stem cells, that's only with animals?
So there are two kinds of stem cells. They're the stem cells that are basically the progenitor cells for all the cells in your body. So, for instance, for blood, there are blood-forming stem cells. For bone, there are bone-forming stem cells. So there are those stem cells. So we are already, with respect to CRISPR and other treatments, we're already working with those cells. The embryonic stem cells, which are the precursors to those cells, those are the cells in the embryo that are basically the blueprint or the manufacturing platform for what you will become. There are also trials involving those cells. That's proven to be a harder challenge, but also really important. That's what Prop 71 we voted on and passed probably 10 years ago. It's a $3 billion bond measure that supports embryonic stem research. Real briefly, let me just touch on a few other things that are coming out of the pipeline related to that. Synthetic biology is huge at both Berkeley and Stanford. We're really rock stars in this field, along with MIT.
Now, what's synthetic biology?
Synthetic biology is, so the Human Genome Project gave us the ability to read the genome, like words in a book. But the real promise in this is not just to read it and understand it, but to write it. If we can write it, and this relates to CRISPR as well, but then also build it. So what we're able to do now is you can buy nucleotides like off the shelf from different companies and piece together nucleotides to create a sequence that you want. So, the whole it's like Tinker Toys, sort of made to order parts.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can't, there are folks like Craig Venter and others that are saying they want to build life from scratch, where you basically create a whole genome, just build it from scratch to create what you want. We're not there yet. I don't know that we're ever going to be there, and certainly maybe not in our lifetime. But what we can do is build a sequence of a gene and then insert it into an existing cell to tell it what you want it to do. So at Stanford, Christine Smolke and Drew Endy are basically using yeast cells, and they're inserting synthetic sequences that they've written to get the yeast to do what they want it to do. And what they're getting it to do is make synthetic drugs, which are going to be way better than the drugs, just produced from plants or other materials. I see that being a really huge game changer in terms of creating a manufacture, using cells to be manufacturing platforms, essentially, mm-hmm. for all kinds of products. At Berkeley, they're doing that with making biofuels using, they're adding genes to yeast or bacteria. So that's a field, it's just so exciting, and I love it because the Bay Area is such a hot spot for it. The other thing that's moving along and is harder, but also really, really promising, and that is tissue engineering. And that's basically building tissue from scratch. We talked a little bit about stem cells, using cells to create ultimately, let's say, a new liver, right, or a new cardiac muscle, so that if you have a heart attack and you lose a section of your heart, maybe they could put in it was like a patch kit,
Mm-hmm.
and then also with lung disease, and there we're using pigs and other animals to say, can we grow tissues as replacement tissues for people with really catastrophic diseases
Now, I
who might
believe they've
otherwise
done that
need
with mice,
transplants?
right?
Yeah.
I believe they've
What's
done
that?
that with mice, right? Where they've grown
Yes.
like a human ear on
Yes.
top of a mouse.
Exactly. So what we can do now, we have mice, we have pigs, or other animals that lines of which either have no immune system or they have an immune system that's human-like, which you can do through genetics. And when you put human tissue in the animal, they don't reject it. They accept it, and the tissue grows. And this is a big deal for pigs because it turns out, like, who knew, but the organs of pigs are pretty similar in size to some human organs. So you can grow human organs in pigs and not have them reject it. And, just think about how many people die because they're not able to they're in line for a transplant and they can't get one.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of promise there.
Now, in theory, if uh, it sounds like when they go through the FDA trials and it gets released to the public and they're able to use stem cells to regenerate organs for you, would they be using your own stem cells or would these be generic general stem cells that they can
I
then?
think ideally, a very good question. Ideally, you'd like to use your own because it's a whole lot of tailoring the animal and the tissue to your own immune system, but it can be done or it will be done because then it's personalized, right?
Mhm.
Like now, if you were to donate your kidney to me, I'd accept it, but I'd be on immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of my life. If we can get rid of those drugs, and if you can breed an animal with essentially my immune system, and then that tissue is accepted by my body, and we're good to go at that point. And there's a lot of research going on there, but I think it's all within reach.
Now, to get stem cells, you mentioned you can find them in your bone and blood, correct? But um, but you also mentioned embryonic stem cells. Are these the same type of stem cells that you would find in um, what is it, the plasma of the womb?
So the embryonic stem cells are found in very early embryonic development. They're called blastocysts. It's within the first 2 days to maybe 6 or 7 days. I forget exactly how many days of development. And basically, these are the cells that, as you develop as a fetus, it differentiates. So the cell will become dedicated to be a progenitor to a lung cell, or progenitor to a blood cell, or progenitor to a bone cell. But these very, very, very early cells in the early development, they have the ability to become anything. So the beauty of them is that if you create the right mix of hormones, chemical cocktails, you can induce that cell to become what you want it to become, which is brilliant, totally brilliant. And there've also been, there's been controversy about, should we access blastocysts for this purpose? On the federal level, there's still a lot of resistance. That ship has sailed in California. When Prop 71 passed and made that $3 billion available, there are harvesting cells that have been donated. Blastocysts that have been donated by women in fertility treatment clinics, and have completely legal access to them. And it's just opened up research in a way that has not been possible on the federal level. So it's just another example of California being a real leader there. And I will just jump in and say that there's newer research that shows you don't actually need to use embryos. You can actually reprogram skin cells, plain old skin cells. You can actually like reverse engineer, reverse evolve those cells to make them less mature than they are, and then get them to do what you want them to do. It's complicated. I won't get into it here, but
Yeah, yeah, that
yeah.
sounds really amazing. Yeah, and speaking of that, one thing that I read recently is that the mitochondria that's within our cells have completely different DNA than us as humans.
Um, yeah, yes and no. It's
It's complicated.
it's complicated, yeah, but it is different.
So, I,
A
so
bit a
I
bit
basically
different.
read an article dumbed down for me.
That's okay. Yeah. So the mitochondria people might know is like our energy storehouse. It's in every cell, and it's inherited from the mother on the maternal side, but it also is unique in its own way. So some really interesting debates there, and this isn't happening yet, but it's happening in the UK and other places where for fetuses that have mitochondrial disease, can you do mitochondrial transplants with someone with healthy mitochondria? And it is, and at that point you do have essentially three different sets of genetics involved. So they joke that it's having three parents. It's not, of course, but yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Very
interesting,
interesting.
and we could spend an hour just on that.
Yeah. So, what advancements do you see in science in the next 5 to 10 years with, I mean, everything from stem cells and everything else that you've mentioned? I mean, where do you see 10 years down the road, even 20?
Um, Boy, so all of these areas are going to progress, and a lot of we've touched on a little bit as to where they're all headed. So clearly, in all those fields of using CRISPR, um, using stem cell research, um, using synthetic biology, all of those will progress. Tissue engineering will progress, but there's some other things that are happening, which is interesting. The And this relates to genetics or sequencing as well. Genetic sequencing and genomics the price just keeps dropping so much that my guess is over the next 2 to 5 years, sequencing will really be applied to a mass population that will all be able to. You may not sequence your entire genome from soup to nuts, but all the key parts. So everyone will have really much. This is way beyond what like 23andMe and others are doing. Really medically relevant information, and then the whole area of personalized medicine, where you can really tailor your treatments, who knows, maybe your nutrition, who knows, maybe your exercise, to what your sequence says about you and what you're at risk of.
I feel like
Um,
like 23andMe is going to offer this in 5 years.
yeah. We'll see. I mean, clearly, in the clinical realm, your doctor can be a whole lot smarter about you if he could just pull up your sequence and take a look at it. 23andMe is very good in sort of kind of a meta-analysis.
Hmm.
So other things I see happening, so wearable devices, which are already moving forward really quickly, but because of flexible electronics, it's going to be a whole lot easier to have, let's say, clothing that has computers or sensors or wireless receivers that could monitor, body temperature or glucose levels or you name it.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
there's a device that you can implant into your stomach that tracks your glucose and sugar
yes,
levels
exactly,
for like,
exactly.
yeah, and there's a individual, I forget his name, but he does that just to track how food affects his sugar levels, and he can
Wow.
see it in real time, and it connects to his phone, and it's maybe the size of a grain of rice. This device that you insert underneath the skin in your on your stomach. It's pretty interesting.
Yep, yep, yep. So that is very pioneering and early on. I see that whole field just exploding.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
And
if
then finally, just and the other things that are out there, and we haven't talked about space, but we've got NASA here, which is just
yeah,
so
NASA and the new
wonderful.
Space Force.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so we'll see. Yeah. Um, yeah. On a more civilian basis, I love Mars. I think everyone loves Mars, and I think we'll see a whole lot. I mean, already NASA's put out requests for ideas for what we want our living accommodations to look like up there. How will we when we get, you can't carry all this stuff, right? You can't fly with it. When we get there, how do we start constructing places that would be habitable? So I think the whole search for liquid water there, the whole search for what construction materials might be up there, all of that is going to be a huge focus in the future, the near future. And
Yeah,
then
I
and then
believe they
finally, I
recently.
think with respect, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
believe they recently just announced that they have strong evidence that Mars used to be a blue planet like our planet.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So if there was water there, there's not anymore. But is there water vapor? Is there ice? There seems to be ice. There's suggestion that there ice. How do we access it? How can we use it? It's the logistics of living on Mars are pretty complicated. But if all those key ingredients are there, and we can create small manufacturing, basically do 3D printing to create buildings and the tools that we need.
Hmm.
It's I hope I live long enough to see that.
Yeah, there's a great video on YouTube where you can see someone put like a 3D. I mean, it's a sophisticated 3D printer, but they put it on. It looks like a construction. Like a construction arm. I can't think of the name of it, but they were building the first 3D printed building, and it was a really small building, obviously just to showcase it for the video. But all
Hmm.
that's coming. They have the technology. It's just a matter of, well, how do we make it big enough, and how do we fly it to Mars, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, you can't fly with the construction equipment, but you can fly with the component. You can fly with some of the basic tools,
Hmm.
and then use those basic tools to build bigger tools, and cranes and hydraulic lifts, and who knows what you need to create buildings. Maybe not that much if the buildings are simple, but yeah, yeah, getting things there because of what it takes in terms of fuel to fly that far, and time, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, uh, getting things there is going to be hard, but through 3D printing, you can build what you need if the components are there and if you have the technology.
Hmm. Now, let's go back to the California wildfires. It's something that a lot of people have been experiencing and suffering from here the last few years. And with global warming continuing to, with global temperatures on the rise, it seems like every single year it gets warmer and warmer. I mean, is this something that's going to continue happening every year? What's been your experience in covering these wildfires, and what, on the scientific front, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I sort of had my eyes open this summer, to be honest with you. I've, like everyone, always considered fires the enemy and put them out. And we do need to put them out when they are threatening communities. But the other reality is that California is a flammable state. It's always been a flammable state. Our plants are designed, and a lot of them actually need fire to germinate. So for 100, 120, 130 years, we've been suppressing every single fire, and there are unintended consequences there. So if anyone who's been up through Yosemite or in the southern Sierra, they've seen all the dead trees there. The trees are so dense, they're so drought stressed, they're so insect stressed and killed that they're just matchsticks. And so essentially what happens is California has the best firefighting force probably on the planet, frankly, certainly in the United States. So we can suppress 97% of the fires that ignite, and we can do it relatively quickly. The ones that get away, they're these mega fires, and that's what we're experiencing now. And the reason we're experiencing now is that there's so much fuel out there. Then they just get way out from under you so fast, and they're so dangerous, and they're so destructive, and they're burning at extraordinary temperatures. It's much better to, basically, the take home is it's better to have small fires that are moderate fires that just kind of putz along, and they clear out the underbrush, they clear out the shrubs, it keeps the tree density down. The trees that do live have a fighting chance of being healthy and strong and all that. And we don't have those mega fires. So, when we're talking about that wildland-urban interface where a lot of us live up against forests that are at huge risk right now. So I basically see more prescribed burns, and there will be more prescribed burns. We just passed legislation that will mandate that. More thinning or logging, which is absolutely essential to help control some of these prescribed burns. And, there are ways to do it well, and there are ways to do it terribly. There are parts of California where burning isn't the answer. The oak grasslands, particularly like we see in the East Bay, they're bringing grazing back. Get rid of those shrubs, those really high grasses. They act as ladder fuels. Those are the fuels that act like ladders. When you've got tall grass, it'll run right up to the crowns of those beautiful oaks and kill them. Get those grasses back down, because we used to have animals grazing all over California, and we don't anymore. Mm-hmm. And then in Chaparral, we actually don't want continuous fires, because that's really hard on chaparral, and eventually they'll die and be replaced by invasive grasses and everything there. And I think there we just need to quit creating fires. 95% of fires in California are human ignitions, and protect our communities. So maybe put fuel breaks around communities, and certainly put fuel breaks around your house, of protecting your house. Because then no matter what else is going on, your house is as safe as you can make it safe.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask you.
The scientists are changing their thinking on all this. Our strategy will depend on the habitat, and there are different strategies for different habitats. So,
yeah, I was just going to ask you, how can a property owner protect their property from these massive fires? I mean, is there a way to?
Yeah.
I mean, you can
the
install,
really
I guess,
massive
sprinkler
fires,
systems,
like
but what else
Santa
can you do?
Rosa, it's really hard, because the deal with massive fires, particularly mega fires, when they're combined with wind, is you've got embers that are flying like, a mile and a half in places in Santa Rosa. But there are things you can do to reduce your risks. So clearly having asphalt composition roofing or other roofing that's non-flammable is critical, because if that ember lands on your house, it will not ignite. Flammable wood shingles, shake roofs, I think hopefully everyone knows, are a really bad idea. Putting mesh over the vents, because the houses typically burn from inside out, so the ember will come through the vents and then ignite. And then for your sort of garden variety fire, which we'll start to see more of clearing defensible space. And by that, it doesn't mean clear cutting around your entire house. It means, if you've got some Doug firs or redwoods nearby, just clean them up at the bottom. Get rid of those lower branches. Chip and haul away a lot of the brush that's surrounding your house. And Cal Fire and others have some great graphics that explain exactly what your house should look like. Keeping grass short if you're living in a rural area is really important. So there's a whole lot you can do just around your own home. Clearly, if you have neighbors who don't do that, that's going to create a risk for your house. There's actually now litigation about that, which I'd like to write more about. The community of Idlewild, which people may know of, it's down in the, I think, San Bernardino, it's Southern California, Riverside County. They have a fuel break around the entire community. And by that, it's not clear cutting. It's just 100 to 250 yards where fuel's been reduced. They've gotten rid of all the tall, dangerous trees. And when that Cranston fire that we had this summer came racing up the mountains, headed right for Idlewild, it hit that fuel break. It didn't stop the fire, but it gave firefighters a place to be to fight it. And it dropped. It just kind of crept along, and they could drop fuel from the air. They could bring in crews, and the entire town was saved. It would have looked like Santa Rosa. It would have just gone up in a minute. So there's a lot of talk about how do we do that. And, funding, of course, is an issue, but you look at how much it costs to fight a fire. You look at what the insurance casualties are, what it costs of
you're talking
homes
about
that have been
billions and
lost.
billions of dollars.
Yeah, right. And it's way cheaper to do prevention. And we really need to change policies to make that happen. Like right now, it's really hard. Private homeowners can't get grants to do what needs to be done to protect their homes. And communities have a hard time getting grants. So it's, how do we, and then if you do put in fire resistant construction material, let's say, or you spend a lot of money creating defensible space, your insurance rates don't reflect that the way they do if you make your house seismically safe. So there are a lot of policy changes that need to happen to really start moving us into the right direction. The strategy we've been using, which is try and fight every fire we can all the time, is not sustainable. This state will burn. It's not if it'll burn; it's when it'll burn. And how do we act when it does burn?
Can these
moving forward what
wildfires?
we need to think about.
Yeah, can these wildfires also contribute to global warming?
Yes, there's some research that they do. There's also research showing that prescribed burns create fewer greenhouse gases than the uncontrolled fires. So again, this gets to my point of not if but when. We can either have small, 100, 200, 300 acre fires pretty routinely when it's safe all the time, spring and fall typically. Or we can have these mega fires that just put out massive amounts of smoke that are actually worse for the environment, worse for the air, worse for climate change than smaller fires. So they do contribute, but they're alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Now, switching up the topics here, the right to die law in California, is this something that you've been covering quite a bit of?
Not a whole lot recently since it passed, but I did track its implementation, and I covered it really intensely when it was being debated. Since it's passed, to be honest with you, it's been pretty flawless. There haven't been the kind of horror stories that we feared of, coercion by families or the handicapped being taken advantage of or whatever. There have been several hundred, the data's old, but from last year, there were several hundred Californians who took advantage of it. And none of the abuses that I think were a concern when it was first being discussed. Not everyone has access to it. The data shows that people who are using it tend to be highly educated. They're disproportionately white, and we're not sure why that is. It could be that not every physician is as informed about it or willing to engage. But it's been, I've got to say, it's been a pretty smooth rollout.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is for the terminally ill only. You then have the right and the choice to end your life early. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so,
yep.
and
so basically, what it says is you have to be 18 or older. You have to be of presence of mind to be able to communicate what your health wishes are. You need to have a terminal illness, and that is, it's defined as a physician saying that you'll die within 6 months, which isn't perfect, but clearly within 6 months of death. And then there's this whole sort of regulatory path that you need to follow, and that is you need two doctors to approve your request. So you've got your attending doctor and then a physician doctor and a consulting doctor that confirms everything that the attending doctor said. And the second doctor says, yes, they will die within 6 months. Yes, this is the prognosis. Yes, the patient is capable of making this informed decision. And then you have to make 3 different requests to a physician, one of them separated by 15 days. You need witnesses, and then you need to make a final attestation, it's called. It's not like anything that's impulsive. It takes a lot of planning, and maybe for that reason, that's why more people aren't able to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, wasn't there another state that had it passed before we did? Was it Oregon?
Yes, so several states. So Oregon, Washington, I'm forgetting.
Yeah,
Colorado. I'm confusing
yeah,
this with
it could have
cannabis
been.
regulation.
Yeah.
But certainly I remember we looked at Oregon. I think Vermont, maybe. We looked at other states and what did they do and how did they do it, and what did they not address that we needed to address. So, boy, California took a pretty long and thorough and thoughtful approach to it. Bill Moning from down in Carmel and Louis Wolk out of represents Davis. They were the leaders on this and really carried it through. And there have been, as people know, there have been court challenges, but so far it's withstood that.
Yeah, it's always amazing to see the arguments for and against highly. Yeah, I mean, it was highly politicized. Um, but to see the arguments against it and then it passes, and then to not see any of those arguments happen, and I guess that's something that happens very often with a lot of different things, not just the right to die law. You probably see a lot more in journalism, right?
Yeah, we always tend to, and it's important. It's part of the process. And it's the beauty of democracy. It's like you play out the worst case scenarios. Like what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And critics of whatever's being proposed will um, describe those, but it's really important because then we can make it better. And again, beauty of democracy is like each one of our concerns you can address. By and large, you can address those concerns, and that makes it a much more airtight and safer. Whether it's right to die or anything else package. So the one legal argument that actually has carried water, and I think there's something to be said for that, and the one that's really persisting to this day, is the argument that the process through which this legislation was passed was not routine. And by that they mean in Sacramento it died in one of the subcommittees, and then Brown and others called a special committee in the final hours of the legislature to take it up. And it was a healthcare this gets in the weeds a bit. It was a healthcare subcommittee, but it was supposed to address healthcare funding and Medicaid funding and all that. And then this was introduced and it passed. And critics say this is not the way business should be done. You should not you should not introduce legislation that failed elsewhere and pass it in this special, essentially a workaround.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I happen to believe that the legislation was solid, and but is that the way we want to get stuff done in Sacramento? I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
So it's a process dispute as opposed to a content and substance dispute. So yeah.
Yeah. So in this day and age where we have a lot of people attacking the media, different journalists, fake news, that type of environment, how what do you feel the future of journalism will be? I mean, where do you see this going? I mean, is this good? Is this bad? What's happening in
I
on your end?
yeah, I mean, I'm admittedly biased, but as Jerry Brown said, facts still matter. Facts still matter, and particularly in the Bay Area, we have so many intelligent readers. I mean, every day I hear from people that have really thoughtful questions, really profound questions. You know, if you misplace a decimal point, they are on it. And I think, you gotta, it's like that's why we're here, right? It's what makes this such an amazing place. So I think for our readers, facts do matter, and they ask a lot of journalism. And our challenge is not with journalism per se. It's how do we get journalism out there? How do we create a business model that supports journalism? And that's sort of a separate but related topic. So I think people, intelligent people, will always wake up every morning. Intelligent, curious people will always wake up every morning and say, "What's going on out there? And what do I need to know to be more informed and to help build the democracy that we deserve?" And the only way that's going to happen is through journalism.
Mhm.
And I think I feel strongly that we need to honor the important role that journalism plays in creating a well-informed electorate, so that when we go to the ballot, when we create initiatives, when we vote in city council, that we're basing it on real information based on real facts. And the decisions we make are only as good as the input we have, the quality of the information we have going into those
Yeah,
decisions.
do you feel like the Bay Area news readers are more in tune and educated about the news overall?
Yes, I think they're very educated, and they may not be educated about everything, but they're certainly educated on what they know and love, and they're extremely educated.
Yeah,
And
the one thing that's really surprised me in the last probably 3 to 4 years, and I've mentioned this on the podcast several times, is just to see the younger generation of people getting involved with the news and politics. And part of it has to deal with social media and the easy access to the internet. But back when I was growing up in elementary and middle school, you did not hear a single kid talking about politics. Now,
well,
everyone's
uh huh,
talking about politics.
it's great. It's really great, and I think it's really important. A lot of people say, "Well, kids don't read newspapers anymore." It doesn't matter. They don't need to be reading newspapers. They need to read our content where we deliver it, which is increasingly digital. And if they read it on Facebook and it came from the Mercury News, East Bay Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, LA Times, I don't care. What they're reading is the content produced by these great journalists, and they're going to be smarter about it. And they are reading it. Look, you're right. I mean, young kids are really engaged. And, my daughter in her 20s gets online and reads the New York Times every single morning. And she may not pick up a paper copy, but she's reading it digitally. She's reading stories that are shared on social media. Kids are on Twitter, just you name it. And the beauty of this whole new digital universe is people have access to everything, everywhere. Now the challenge for the reader, of course, is then to say, is this solid reporting or not?
Hmm.
And I would like to think that our news establishments, we do the vetting for them, and that our editors are here long days every single day deciding this holds weight, this doesn't, this is solidly reported, this isn't.
Well, I
And
would
so we do
imagine
that.
that's got to
Uh-huh.
be something very frustrating on your end. You know what it takes to do the proper research in order to put a well pieced article out there, and then to see, I guess, other organizations to just kind of half-ass it or just flat out
Right,
lie just for a news
right.
story. That's got to be very frustrating to see on your
It's really
end.
frustrating. It's really frustrating. So several frustrations. There's that, which is just shoddy reporting based on one source or based on opinion and not backed up. I'd like to think that Bay Area readers know better than that, but it's frustrating because it gets traction and gets talked about and all that. What's also frustrating is when things essentially get ripped off from our website, name pulled off of it.
Mm-hmm.
They might rewrite the top or just restructure it, and then there these aggregation sites and publish it. Because then we're not getting the revenue. Like every time someone clicks on a Mercury News story or every time someone subscribes to Bay Area News Group, that subscription is paying my salary. It's paying Paul Rogers' salary, our amazing environmental writer. It's paying for Katie Murphy's salary, who covers Bay Area news in Sacramento. Pays for my editors, who are some of the smartest people I've ever met, and that's that. And it doesn't pay as much, trust me, but it's paying for the legwork that we do, and it's paying for our education. It's paying for our years of experience. So that's what you get when you subscribe to Bay Area News Group. That's what you're supporting. And when you don't support it, it goes away. And our staff is way smaller than because of Craigslist and business models and other things. Our staff is smaller than it was, but the folks that are here are damn good. And without them, you're right. We're totally at the mercy of God knows what.
Mm-hmm.
That some 16-year-old sitting in his parents' basement is creating.
Just trolling. Yeah.
And we get the news we deserve. And if we're willing to pay, I like to think we're sort of beyond this information is free age where everyone expected everything to be free all the time. I think we know better now.
Yeah, we're definitely getting to a point where I think as a society we've realized that there is a lot of fake news. There is a lot of information out there that's been poorly put together, poorly researched, or not even researched at all. It's just someone's opinion based on how they feel without facts. And it seems like the people are realizing that and coming to a point where they're now expecting more out of the people putting out the content. They're expecting, hey, if you're going to put something out with a big headline, I expect some research to be behind it. I expect there to be facts, and we want to see that. And you're going to lose credibility extremely fast in this day and age because now you could simply Google things and fact check a lot of information out there.
Exactly. I think you're right. I think they are real. And also, like, what's your time worth, right? So if you're going to read something that's poorly reported and ill-informed, what a waste of time that is. Wouldn't you rather read something by, Dr. Larry Altman at the New York Times, who's, a prestigious medical degree, writing about medicine, or Paul Rogers, who could pretty much recite the Clean Air Act off the top of his head. So I think you're right. I think people are coming around, and that's rewarding. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's been the best part of journalism for you?
Oh boy, I guess I'm an optimist, and I feel like if you give people information and if you give people strong education and you live in a community with so many research universities, they're making the world a better place. I mean, the world is a better place. There are epidemics we've stopped. There are vaccines we've created. There are, climate crises that we're confronting, hopefully in time. There's water that we're getting better at preserving. I've had the privilege of being around when some of the Nobel Prizes were awarded, and those are experiences I'll never, ever forget, of being at UCSF when Michael Bishop and Harold Varmus got the Nobel Prize for molecular biology at Stanford. And I was there when Andrew Fire and Roger Kornberg, who's a chemist, were awarded the Nobel Prize, or it was announced. And these are giants that live amongst us. They're like at our grocery stores. They're kids in our high schools. So it's part of it is I feel like we're in this complicated, crowded, stressful, struggling global world, more people, more problems. So there's that. And then we have all these solutions that we're coming up with for each one of these things as they emerge. And if that's not enough, we're like going to Mars, right? And understanding all these extrasolar planetary systems of all these perhaps Earth-like planets out there. It just, I mean, that's the beauty of science and research, is that it really is trying to save our planet and make us healthier, make us safer. So, I mean, I've got the best beat at the paper. It's a good news beat. It's like, here's today's solutions for yesterday's problems. So it's good.
That's amazing. Well, Lisa, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. Tons of great information. I'm excited to see where CRISPR and the stem cell trials and research lead to. I want to wish you the best with your career. You've had an amazing career, and looking forward to the future papers and articles that you put out.
Thank you. And thanks for your interest, and thanks for readers out there who are subscribers, and we love you all. So thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at markguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.